All right, good afternoon, everyone, and probably good morning to some of you out there. This is Patricia Allen with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and thank you all very much for joining us today to give you an update on the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife campaign and the next steps that you can do to hopefully help us move this campaign forward. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please call in for the audio and the access code. I put it in the chat box twice, so if you don't see it once, hopefully you'll see it the second time. Any questions that you have during the presentation, please write them in that chat box, and at the end we will scroll through each of them, read them aloud so everyone can hear what the question is, and then answer them one by one. So they will be answered, but we'll be waiting till the end to answer those questions. Everyone is muted. We have about 80 people on the call already, and the numbers are rising. So yes, that's why we have everyone muted. Otherwise, we'll get nothing but back feed. So any questions you have, reminder, please put them in the chat box. And just hit send, and we will read those aloud for everyone to hear and answer them one by one. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Sean Saville. He is the campaign manager for the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife, and he'll be the main person talking today, giving us our update. So Sean.
Great, thanks Patty, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. Wanted to give you all an update on the trajectory of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act as it was introduced in the House back in December, and a little bit more about some of the strategy, some of the tools and resources that we have recently developed for your use, and some good other information that should be useful to you in your efforts to help us advance the legislation. So, with that, I will jump right in to a little bit of background on the legislation, some of the timing, and a few other things that you should find useful. So, back in December, December 14th to be specific, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act was reintroduced in the House of Representatives. New bill number is HR 4647, has a nice ring to it. There were a couple small changes to the language made that I think a number of you have seen in various forums, probably coming from Jen Mock-Schaefer, from our office, who's here today too, to answer questions a little later on too. So if folks have specific questions about language and what exactly the bill does, use of funds, et cetera, she's probably our best person to answer some of those questions. So that's why Jen is here. That legislation was referred to the House Natural Resources Committee, as well as two subcommittees in that Resources Committee, the Federal Lands Subcommittee and the Water, Power, and Oceans Subcommittee as well. So our congressional outreach for the near term will focus primarily on the members of those subcommittees and the broader committee. I think with the goal for the next sort of benchmark here being to have a hearing in natural resources. So we'll have a little bit of work to do to get the chairman comfortable with the legislation and hearing from his colleagues in the committee and wanting to raise the visibility of the legislation to the point where we have a hearing on it. So we are actively seeking co-sponsors of the legislation, and we'll certainly want to utilize all the good connections that state agency directors, staff, and your game and fish commissions have with those targeted members of Congress. The legislative director for Mr. Fortenberry's office, lead sponsor on the Republican side, will be adding the names of those co-sponsors as they come on and working to sort of be the gatekeeper with regards to trying to keep the R's and D's to sort of a 1-in-1 ratio. So we've been working closely with the staff from Mr. Fortenberry's office as well as Mrs. Dingell's office to sequence those co-sponsors and to work with them on the sort of timing of outreach to those targeted members. So moving along, we currently have 8 co-sponsors on the legislation. You're not going to see one on here that has not been added yet, but this is if you go to Congress.gov, this is what you would see as far as co-sponsors for the legislation. So we're sort of in the very beginning stages of gathering those co-sponsors, working through some of the co-sponsors that were on the legislation the last go-around as well, and bringing some of those folks on early, and then working to do outreach in Resources Committee, as I said. So we'll be doing some specific outreach to directors and your commissioners and staff directly, where you have, the states that have those Resources Committee members, so that we can sort of walk through with you, specific strategies for reaching out to those members and how you might want to approach doing any of that specific outreach, asking for in-district meetings, maybe doing field visits, things like that, as we get a little further down the road. So unless Jen wants to add anything else on the sort of legislative background front, I'll move along with sort of where we are on the resolution front from the states. So we've been holding strong at 24 state resolutions so far from the state commissions, plus the regional associations, all but Seattle at this point, have passed supportive resolutions in favor of the legislation and the campaign as well. Other states have written letters of support specifically to their delegations, and I think it would be a good idea at this point to, if you haven't recently sent a copy of those resolutions to your House delegations, just to remind them that, hey, our state has passed a resolution in support of this legislation. It's important for us. Talk about some of the success stories that you've enjoyed there at the state level, all the great conservation work that you're doing, and specifically why this increased funding would benefit your state and why it's so important. I think, with that, there are a couple other opportunities to raise the visibility of those resolutions, maybe do some press around them. I know states have used those creatively to their advantage in various ways. So we can send around some examples of how states have leveraged those. And I think, we would love to see additional resolutions coming out of states that have not passed them to date, to make sure that we're showing a strong nationwide base of support for the legislation, and making sure that we're really driving home the importance to your state agencies of the legislation as it's passed. The sort of outlines that you're seeing here on some of these states are demonstrating the chair and ranking. So the red would be the chairs of the House Natural Resources Committee as well as the subcommittees, and the blue outlines would be the states where the ranking members of those same committees and subcommittees are from. California is purple there because it has one of each, so you get, red and blue makes purple. So, you can kind of see the heavy Western membership of those committees there, and I think that to some extent will inform our strategy and some of our messaging components as well, with that sort of Western heavy slant. With that said, I thought it was interesting to see this new polling that's just recently come out of public opinion strategies, and it was commissioned by the Colorado College, sort of a public opinion project that they're doing on conservation values and public opinion in the West. So, I think some of these statistics and numbers on public opinion in the West are going to be informative as to our messaging strategy, and I think, useful in terms of being able to see some of the trends in terms of self-identification in this case, as the slide dictates, as to how people are sort of self-identifying themselves as conservationists, in the West, and shows you sort of a state breakdown of how those folks are identifying themselves and some of the trends that we're seeing from year to year. So interesting stuff there coming out of this new polling that's coming out. Some additional stats from that same poll showing Western values and the importance of outdoor recreation, and sort of the importance of identifying with being able to do those activities that especially folks out west really enjoy doing. So this includes a lot of different activities: hiking, camping, backpacking, all the sort of traditional stuff, but as well as hunting and fishing, wildlife washing, a lot of the other sort of wildlife affiliated outdoor recreation. And this 74% is, of note, significantly higher than the national average. So, shows the importance of outdoor recreation to those folks out west, but, certainly across the country as well. Again, some more interesting statistics about the value of outdoor recreation to the economy out west, which is consistent with some of our messaging and some of the things that we saw in trends and market research that we had done earlier on in the campaign. Majority of voters in these western states really view outdoor recreation as important to the economy and to the ways that they make their consumer choices, and certainly something that is highlighted in a lot of media, that you're seeing, of course, from the state agency's perspective as to, your constituencies being able to, recreate at a high level and being able to enjoy healthy fish and wildlife populations for outdoor recreation purposes. So, there's a lot of tie-in to some of the components of the legislation and some of the sort of components of the messaging that we'll be using moving forward on this legislative campaign as well. For those of you that are in Colorado or near Colorado, you may have seen some of the stories and reports of the economic impact of having the outdoor retailer show there this week in Denver that was recently moved from Salt Lake City. It's the first time it's been in Denver this year. The projected economic impact of just having that outdoor retailer show there in Denver this year is upwards of $110 million. So, that's just having the show there, not to mention, all the gear and, tours and trips and all that stuff that it's happening. That whole economy is about, somewhere between 80 and $100 billion a year that we're seeing from economic impact of that outdoor recreation. So some good tips for messaging there and some good tie-ins to really maintaining that connection between having healthy fish and wildlife populations and being able to enjoy the great outdoors. This sort of ties into some of the messaging that we've been using. Folks have seen a lot of this already in different formats. We've been utilizing this messaging, online, in our social media content, on the website that we've created, and a lot of the fact sheets that we've developed. And, this just gives you some examples of some of the bullets that we're using to really speak to the main benefits of the legislation. So just to give you some examples there. And this is in materials that we've handed out before. The Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife continues to grow and expand out of the Blue Ribbon panel. And it's being utilized as a great demonstration of the diversity of support for the bill. Many of these partners, as well as a lot of others, are assisting in the legislative effort, as well as helping work on positive media, messaging to their memberships with e-alerts and social media blasts, things like that. And educating their partners as to the benefits of the legislation, how they see the impacts of the conservation funding that would be implemented from the bill on the ground, and how they might be able to partner with state agencies in the implementation of that good proactive conservation funding should the bill pass. So, these are some of the sort of core partners of the Alliance that you're seeing here, but there are certainly a lot of others that have come out in support of the bill and of the larger initiative as well. So I know many of you have been working with your affiliates of these organizations at the state level, sort of building your state coalitions. That's great. And we look forward to working with a lot more folks on the ground to get out the word and generate a lot of good public support for the legislation moving forward. The next couple slides here are going to show you some of the good products that we have developed for your use in advocacy around the legislation, education of partners, and being able to communicate with your congressional delegations and members of Congress as well to speak to the benefits of this funding, both on the ground as well as just to your state agencies. So good legislative one-pager here, pretty standard stuff. We've been working with your staff in the states to develop some really good state one-pagers as well. So the next slide will show you some of the state materials that we produced. These are all on the Alliance Toolkit that lives in a Google Drive that you got the link to along with the invitation to this webinar. And I think we've sent that around in a couple different places as well. We'll send that up again in follow-up to this webinar. So, we're developing a lot of good content, a lot of good materials for your use in doing outreach, and continue to check out that online toolkit as new materials are developed. So we look forward to, for those of you that we haven't worked on a state fact sheet, we look forward to working with you, to really sort of highlight the great conservation successes that you've had on the ground, the various partnerships that you're working on with state partners in your states, making the strong case for increased funding for conservation. And thanks to everybody that's helped put those state fact sheets together. We look forward to working with everybody else on doing those. I think we're up to about 15 or 16 completed ones at this point. And again, those are all online in that Google Drive. We also have this great campaign website ready for use that was developed back in the early fall, but we really hadn't been driving traffic to it yet. We've really started to do that now, promote it on all of our social channels, as well as trying to get partners to utilize it. The main purpose of that website really is to talk a little bit about the Alliance and some of the partners that are involved, but also be able to accept comments. That Take Action feature, you can drive traffic there that makes it easy to send a letter directly to your representative encouraging them to co-sponsor the bill. So, some nice imagery there, some good statistics and sort of economic data about the impacts of the legislation, a little bit about sort of the history of the Blue Ribbon Panel and the recommendations that were made there, some of the good information about the species of greatest conservation need, how this would help their conservation, and pretty straightforward, nice clean website. So feel free to drive traffic there, let partners use it. It'll be up and running, and we'll be building it out eventually with some additional information about the various partners that are involved in the Alliance, some materials that you can download, as well as some of the video and social content that we're developing as well. We've created also some really nice, engaging social media content. The Bon Maroc team that we've been working with, that's leading the Alliance media and PR strategy, has created some nice social media content that's updated almost daily, certainly weekly. And they're creating some nice infographics like this and some really nice imagery about the various fish and wildlife species that are sort of highlighted both at the state level and across the country. So, we're hoping that the states that with social media channels that utilize those channels will be able to share and like all of this content, and that you'll be able to engage the various audiences that you communicate with regularly in advocacy where appropriate on the bill, and then also just sort of that general education messaging on the importance of wildlife conservation funding sort of more broadly. So just some examples of some of that good content. And then the next slide, you'll see the hashtags. I guess it doesn't have the hashtag. The hashtag that we're using is funding for #4 wildlife. I'm sure you've seen that coming out of Patty in a number of different publications and all the communications that we've had about the social media channels. And then those are the various social media channels that the Alliance has created to promote the campaign. So we also wanted to show the video that we've produced in collaboration with the Ducks Unlimited production team. They made this really nice campaign video for us, and we've been promoting that on our YouTube channel as well as across a couple other social media platforms. Hopefully folks have had a chance to look at that, but we wanted to show it here for you as well if you haven't had a chance to see it. It's just a nice, clean 60-second video. Hopefully the audio works here too. This is the first time that we're going to try to play video on this webinar platform, so bear with us. Hopefully it works. If not, it also lives on that Alliance Toolkit as well, so you can go see it online and use it, share it, like it, use it however you see fit. So we're going to try to play it here for you.
This is our heritage, our future. Clean air and water, healthy forests, abundant wildlife. Our quality of life depends on conserving these natural resources, but time is running out. As our nation grows, these natural treasures become increasingly strained. Fortunately, the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife is leading the way to conserve and protect our valuable natural resources for future generations. But we can't do it alone. We need your help, because all of this is ours. Our nature, our nation, our future. In just minutes, you can conserve and protect our valuable natural resources for future generations. Visit OurNatureUSA.com to learn how you can be a conservation hero.
Yeah, we wanted to note too that I don't know how that came across as far as the quality of the video goes, but it looks a lot better in high def than it probably did on your screen here. But the main goal of that piece is to highlight what the Alliance is about, getting that nice our nation, our nature, our future slogan out there and driving traffic to the website so that folks can take action and encourage co-sponsorship of the bill. So feel free to use that as you see fit, drive traffic to the site, get folks to get engaged, and make sure that folks are given props to the DU production team for their help in creating that video. It's a nice piece. So, you've seen, a lot of you have seen these requests before in various communications that we've sent out. We've gone through some of this, but these are sort of the top line requests that we're making of agencies and partners at this point. So, number one, resolutions of support to demonstrate to your congressional delegations and to the general public the importance at the state level of this legislation and how that windfall of conservation funding on the ground would really benefit all of your constituents that you work with on a daily basis. Promotion of legislation through various means. I know a lot of states have done great work on sending out press releases, doing editorials, doing other positive press. We appreciate all that. If you haven't yet, there's still some good opportunities to do that. There are any number of sort of media hooks that we could utilize moving forward. For instance, coming up in February is Valentine's Day. There's always hooks to use there for positive media.
National Fish and Wildlife Week.
Yeah, National Fish and Wildlife Week. Some other opportunities there to do some positive messaging, get some earned media on that. So if you haven't yet done any of that, feel free to use the releases that we've sent out, the samples of that, adapt them to your states, and then, of course, utilizing that hashtag for social media posting as well. If you haven't already worked with us to develop a state fact sheet, we look forward to doing that with you quickly. We certainly want to utilize those state fact sheets to highlight the species of greatest conservation need in your state, talk about some of those innovative public-private partnerships, the success stories on the ground, and highlight some of the good work that you're doing there, and certainly want to use those for congressional outreach. So we want to work with you quickly to develop those fact sheets. Want to make sure that we're getting out to all the various stakeholders that you work with regularly, that you think are important, and certainly the ones that our members of Congress think are important to weigh in on the legislation. To that end, we have a new Alliance sign-on letter that we are actively seeking sign-ons for. At this point, we're sort of trying to get the initial round of CEOs from the Alliance partners, but I think we'll broaden it out from there. So we'll send that as follow-up as well to this webinar to folks that have been on the webinar and call here. There are a number of in-district recess periods coming up that we hope folks will be able to work with their policy staff in setting up in-district meetings, maybe some field visits or resource tours, show these members of Congress and their staff the great work that you're doing on the ground, how this funding would benefit wildlife in your state, and all the various industries and stakeholders that are going to find this legislation and the funding there very important. Provides a lot of good opportunities for partnerships and engaging additional Alliance partners and members out there on the ground. So, we've got a lot of good information on setting up those meetings and some examples of other states that have done that successfully. Happy to share that information with you and work with you on setting those up if you'd like to. Certainly, being able to drive folks to the website, ournatureusa.com, getting folks to submit letters to their representatives, encouraging co-sponsorship there, and then using the tools that we've created there on the Toolkit to do outreach and education work. So, all this, so what you're seeing here is a great opportunity and a great illustration of the importance of building those relationships and connections with your representatives and their staff. So this is some Nebraska Game and Park staff with Congressman Fortenberry, who's, of course, the lead sponsor of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. They did a field tour with the congressman back in October, where they went out on a boat to check out some conservation areas along the Missouri River. And, in meetings that we've had with the congressman, he always points to this experience as something that's been, really eye-opening, transformational for him, for his understanding of the impact of conservation on the ground. And now he has a great story to tell about this impressive conservation work that the state agency is doing, the importance to his various constituencies of healthy fish and wildlife populations at the state level, and speaks to the great American traditions of hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation, the value to the economy, value of working with private landowners, and preventing species from becoming endangered. So he points to this story, to this opportunity. He likes to highlight it as he's meeting with his constituents and other members. So this is just another great illustration of the power of building those relationships early with your members of Congress. And you never know, it could yield a sponsor of a key bill like this if you nurture those over time. So kudos to the folks in Nebraska for developing those great relationships, and we certainly enjoy working with Mr. Fortenberry and his staff. Just some quick next steps as we work towards advancing the legislation in the House. As I mentioned before, we will be gathering co-sponsors on the legislation, working towards securing leadership on a companion bill in the Senate as well. We definitely want to utilize all those great personal relationships that you, your directors, and your commissioners have to members of Congress. That's going to be key to really have those folks that have those direct contacts weigh in with them being able to utilize the personal contact there. We certainly would like for all agency staff to help get this message out and really being able to build that rich state story talking about successes on the ground. Utilizing all of the partner networks and communications vehicles, the various alliance partners can help do a lot of advocacy at the grassroots level, getting out email communication, utilizing their social media channels, all that. So they're ready and willing to help out, get all that information out, and again, promoting that website in all different sort of places, including the social media channels. Promoting that video, I think we'll continue to do some additional video work. We're also looking at producing shorter versions, a 15 and a 30-second version of that, because not everybody has the attention span to watch a 60-second video on social media. We understand that. So we want to utilize the sort of shorter versions of that too, to really just drive traffic to the site. And then engaging that broader public to demonstrate broad support for the campaign. I think there'll be a number of great opportunities to speak about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, the Alliance, all the great work that you all are doing on the ground and in states, various conferences, conventions, forums, trade shows, field tours, things like that. So if you have any great opportunities coming up that you'd like to brainstorm with us on, by all means reach out, and we're happy to do that. We also have some good sort of handouts and collateral sort of product that we could send out to you too. We have some banners that we've created that speak about the partnership behind the Alliance that we're happy to ship out if folks want to use those for upcoming events, and we're creating more stuff like that all the time. So check back with us if you have specific needs for doing visibility events and public engagement. And then with that, I'll kind of wrap up and give our contact information here so that if folks want to reach out with specific questions that we're not able to address today, by all means, please reach out and let us know. I'm pretty sure folks know how to get a hold of us, and I guess we could stop there and see if we could address some questions. So I know we've had a number of folks type in questions here. We're going to try to get to as many of those as we can, and we'll read them aloud and then try to answer those questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean. And we really appreciate you giving us this update. And yeah, as you said, we've had a number of people who have been writing their questions in that little chat box there. Definitely encourage anyone who has any questions to do that now, and we'll go ahead and answer those questions as we go through. And we will also, we're also recording this, so if you want to share this at a later point, we will be able to do that with you as well. So, Sean, if you want to go ahead and read some of these questions aloud and answer them, it'd be great.
Okay. Thanks, Patty. So first question was, what points of contention do the detractors of the Jeff Fortenberry bill make about it? I don't know.
Offset.
You want to take that? Yeah.
So this is Jen Mock-Schaefer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the association. So far, our biggest challenge is what Congress refers to as an offset. In other words, how are you going to pay for this? It's $1.3 billion a year that's being redirected, and where is that money going to come from, and what's not going to be paid for as a result of that? So that is our biggest question, and because we are proposing to redirect existing revenues and not create a new source of revenue, that means essentially, are you going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and essentially, what's the trade-off there? So our challenge is with some of the more fiscal conservative members of Congress, as well as those who sit on the Budget Committee, they're very sensitive to shifts in funding from one place to another, and we have to help them, I think, see the value that can, in long-term savings, which I think could happen for some species and states, from this ongoing investment in fish and wildlife conservation and helping to secure our fish and wildlife for the future. So part of it is building political support in order to build the political will and desire to pass the bill and overcome that concern of how do we pay for it. Because sometimes Congress just does things and they don't worry about paying for it.
Yes, indeed. And I think that speaks to the next question there too, which is, getting the chairman of House Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Bishop, comfortable with the legislation. I know they're going to have some concerns about, where's the offset for this? How is this impacting, stakeholders, industries, sort of the business interests, especially in his home state of Utah. Fortunately, we have some good answers to some of those questions, and I think we're going to have various stakeholders weighing in, and we've already started our engagement and education of a lot of those members on the Resources Committee. Hopefully, they will be able to communicate with him their understanding of the benefits of the legislation, the benefits to their districts and constituents, and the folks that they hear from various industries, including some of the partners that are Alliance members as well, so especially in the energy sector. So I think it's just a matter of really doing our due diligence to reach out to those members and speak to the various sort of talking points that are going to resonate with them. This question about how do you access the video. That is in the toolkit as well, along with all the state fact sheet, the legislative fact sheet, the press releases, the media materials, all that good stuff. That's all in that toolkit. So if folks haven't had a chance to go check that out, please do that and let us know if there are other things that you would specifically like to have created. We're happy to help work with you to develop those. When do we expect there to be a vote on this? How long do we have to promote it? It's a good question. Not exactly clear. We envision that, there are going to be a number of sort of hurdles or, benchmarks as we move forward on this. I had mentioned earlier that we would like to have a hearing in natural resources. I think we'll probably see a hearing before we see any votes or markups, as they call them, in the various committees. And then, before we get to a floor vote, there'll be, a little bit of work to do there as well. So, Jen, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
Sure. So our bill sponsors, Mr. Fortenberry and Mrs. Dingle, are highly motivated to build as much support for this bill as quickly as we possibly can. And we also know that the leadership and chairman of the House believe in taking bills through what they call regular order. So you need to have a bill hearing, you need to have a bill markup, it needs to pass out of committee before it gets to the floor. They're not just going to hook this thing to something that's already on floor action and try to move it. So they believe in regular order and due process. They would like for us to do as much as humanly possible collectively to get as many bill sponsors and move this through the legislative process within the next 90 days. It doesn't end there because we have, a number of co-sponsors and people to talk to. There's 535 members of the House alone, and that's if only you can ignore the, if we ignore the Senate, which we shouldn't do, there's a whole other 100 offices to visit there. So there is a ton of work for us to do. So the sooner we can complete all of these fact sheets and get into some of these key offices and their colleagues and connections where we have, members with relationships connected to each other, the better off we're going to be. That way we know the points we should be hitting and maybe ones we need to avoid so we can avoid any missteps. I think, we're going to be promoting this until the bill passes, until we get it enacted. And the more support we can garner from interests across various sectors and industries and interest groups, the better off we're going to be in being able to connect with various members of Congress and find the one point that's going to move them in the right direction. So there's that. So I think, we're really looking to see if we can't motivate members of Congress to help us have a bill hearing as a first step. And, I know our bill sponsors are having conversations about that. Our partners are having conversations about that. If we get a large sector of support in the House, it'll make it a lot easier to have a hearing and move through the legislative process.
Yep.
So this is a bit of a marathon, but it's not at a slow pace. It's a pretty quick pace, especially out of the gate.
Yeah. And I think, there's some consideration to some of the timing and sequencing of the co-sponsors that we're bringing on. We focused mostly on Republican co-sponsors at the moment. We think we're going to have more work to do there, especially with some of the fiscal conservatives, as Jen was talking about earlier. We want to look at some of those caucus leaders, some of the opinion leaders in the House that are going to bring on other blocks of votes along with them. So we're being very intentional and strategic in our development of those co-sponsors, especially the sort of initial phase of those legislative co-sponsors here. So along, to the goal of having that hearing in Natural Resources Committee, hopefully here in the next, month to 6 weeks, if we can get all that done. This is an election year as well. There's certainly a consideration as well to some of the time that we'll lose once we get a little closer to the fall. So, we're trying to do as much as we can this spring and early summer to advance the legislation, because we know that we'll be fighting an uphill battle and sort of mired down in a little bit more partisan politics than we'd like to see later on once you get close to election season. So we got a lot of work to do and not a whole lot of time to do it. So we're trying to hit it hard here in this early phase. Keep moving. I think that's sort of, we just answered that question too with some of the process considerations. News about a Senate companion bill.
So this is Jen again. I think we're getting closer to that. We've been trying to schedule some meetings with actual senators to go through some of their wish lists, and I think we have a Democratic lead pretty much secured, and we're working to secure and fulfill the wish list of one of the key targets in the Senate. So I think I'm hopeful that, maybe here within the next month, we'll have a Senate bill introduced or close to being introduced, if not. And, we've worked really hard on the front end of this to garner the support of Chairman Barrasso from the state of Wyoming, and he's supportive of the bill. And his staff have said so publicly in Wyoming meetings, and so hopefully that'll provide an opportunity for hearings, not just in the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, but also in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which is chaired by Senator Murkowski from Alaska. Those are both committees that have an interest in this bill. ENR because of the funding source, which is under their jurisdiction, but Fish and Wildlife is under the jurisdiction of EPW. So we're looking forward to having two committees to build support and co-sponsors there.
Unless you take the next one too.
Where does President Trump stand on the Fortenberry bill? That's a good question. And so this is not a White House or a President Trump priority. It's not any part of the platform that he ran on or campaigned on. It's not part of his 100-day list of priorities to accomplish. And so that is something for us to consider in multiple ways. And I say that because, we really want our bill to be bipartisan, and it's going to have to get bipartisan support to pass, particularly in the Senate. As we get closer to the election, you're going to start to see some very interesting politics, I think, creep up around, President Trump from people who are, vying to turn a Republican seat into a Democratic seat. I think where we stand strong is the fact that we have a bipartisan bill. We keep it bipartisan. We are actively working to garner the support of key people within the administration. And I think that's important to make sure that we can continue with our legislative process and that we continue to have support for the bill. I don't think the president himself probably knows this bill is out there or has, a vested interest in it. We do know that there are certain members in his cabinet that would like to see the legacy of this president and Secretary Zinke, for instance, be second only to Theodore Roosevelt. So we do know that those aspirations are there, along with, some of their other priorities. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. A couple questions about making the presentation available for your use and pulling slides. Happy to do that. We can put it up on the Toolkit as well, so folks can use any of the content here for your outreach presentations. I think we spoke to the next question about the timeline, moving through committees, leadership, et cetera.
We don't know what their response is as far as when they'd be willing to have a hearing,
right.
Just to be clear on that.
Yeah, but as soon as we get any more intel about sort of where we are with regards to those benchmarks, we'll blast out, communications and emails, let everybody know so that, we can sort of turn up the heat and rally around those next decision points and, get positive media on that, be able to utilize some of the strategic partners that we have available to us, weighing in with those members that might be, critical votes or whatever. So, we'll be sure to keep folks informed as anything comes up on that. It's a question about the revenue sources. So, there's been a little sort of back and forth and a little bit of a lack of clarity about where exactly the revenue, what all is entailed in that revenue stream. So is it just oil and gas and energy and minerals? Is it solar and renewables sources as well? I've been exploring this a little bit here with some of my contacts at the Government Accountability Office and the BLM and those that do the federal leasing programs for renewables development. To the best of my knowledge and to the information that we're receiving from the Office of Natural Resource Revenue, who's responsible for collecting any payments from development that happens on federal lands and waters with regards to energy development, we do believe that the sources of solar, wind, geothermal, and those that are categorized, most frequently as renewables, are included in this. So, they go to the General Treasury, and then that money is allocated to various federal programs, including, as a mechanism of this legislation, would be redirected to the Wildlife Conservation Restoration Program. So, yes.
And so that's predominantly leases, like on the public land for
right.
these renewable energy
yes.
sources. They are not paying, for instance, royalties
yeah.
through the Mineral Leasing Act or the Outer Continental Shelf
That's correct.
Act.
So this the mechanism's a little different.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
so
that's important to clarify.
It's rental payments. Renewable developments pay a rental fee for the use of those, rights of ways to develop on public lands versus a, sort of a standard lease that oil and gas companies pay royalties into. So the mechanism is a little different, but we do believe that those sources are included in this general pot of money. And I'm trying to get a little bit more clarity on that from the directly from those federal agencies that are responsible, so that we can, put out some really specific, articulated messaging on that. We'll send around the links to the toolkit again, so that folks have all this information available to you. And then there's a question about a fly-in. We are definitely interested in doing a fly-in. We have not picked a date necessarily to do that. We also think there are probably going to be several different opportunities for various audiences to come to DC in several different groups. We certainly want to have sort of a an alliance partner, CEO type of a fly-in, to get those folks to meet with members of Congress that they might know personally. We definitely want to have a staff level fly-in as well. I know the State Wildlife Grant folks are doing a fly-in in April. I think there'll probably be a number of opportunities in March as well for folks to come in. So we're working quickly to identify some dates and times on those so that we can get that out as quickly as possible. Folks can make plans on that. So stay tuned for more on fly-ins. I think that's it for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean and Jen, for answering all those questions. It does look like we were able to get through all of them, and it is before 2 o'clock, so that's great. Just as a follow-up, a reminder, this was recorded, and if you received an email invitation from either myself or Mark Comfort, then you will be getting another follow-up email within the next 24 hours that will have the recording from this webinar, as well as that link to that toolkit, which is on a Google Drive, and also some attachments about how, if you have not already done your state fact sheets, instructions as to how to do that, so then we can start using that as tools for advocacy to promote this campaign and get this bill passed. So I'll go ahead and send that out within the next 24 hours. If you got this invitation as a forward from someone else, then that person's going to be getting that information, and make sure that you then get that information forwarded to you so you have everything that you need from this webinar so you can go forward and do good work. If you have not heard anything from me, then go ahead and shoot me an email on wait until at least Thursday. My contact information is on here. That way, if it somehow got to your spam, we'll make sure you still get that information. But give us about 24 hours to get this out to you. And if for some reason you don't get it, then on Thursday, go ahead and send me an email, and I'll go ahead and make sure you have all of that information. So thank you very much for joining us here today. We really appreciate all the participation. We had over 100 people on the call, on the webinar today, so that's really exciting, and we look forward to working with you as we move this campaign forward. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.